Good afternoon, patrons, and welcome to the October, 2017 Patroncast. It's that time of the month again. You'll be pleased to know I'm feeling a lot more chill. I'm feeling a lot more chill this month. I was feeling a bit stressed out last month because everything kept breaking. My car kept breaking in various ways, and the plumbing wouldn't flipping work. Everything's been calm this month because things have stopped breaking, which is lovely, and things are now either fixed or in the process of being fixed, and we've spoken to professionals and they know what they're doing, and everything's going to be just fine. So, feeling a lot more chill. Very, very nice indeed. It also helps, by the way, that, kind of for the last few weeks or months or whatever, I think kind of about a month or so, we've been very, close to the wire in terms of the schedule, our end, which is what I like to do, basically, is I like to have, like, a little bit of leeway. So if something were to go wrong, or, you know, a recording decided I didn't like it, or our internet died for a few days, we'd be fine. Because we already had the next few days already completely done, and, you know, edited and rendered, and potentially even uploaded, and basically just ready for me to push a button, which then I can do from my phone, even if our internet were to die, and the videos still go out, and as far as you're concerned, everything's 100% fine. Now, we spent like a month or two or something, way closer to the wire than I'd like, where literally, like, you know, we might be working on something that's coming out the day after, or the day after that, or something like that, which I don't really like being in. It stresses me out a bit to be that close. So we spent a bit of time over the past few weeks, Claire and I together, basically just working on making sure we've got a bit more of a buffer in place. So I'm recording this on... What day am I recording this on? I forget what day it is. Friday. I'm recording this on Friday, and we're very close to basically all of next week being pretty much done or close done already. And I like being a week ahead. Being a week ahead is very, very good indeed. October's been a really interesting month, actually. October's been kind of, it's been a weird month, but it's been a month that sort of sums up the weird situation that exists on YouTube right now. Because by kind of classical, traditional, old YouTube standards, October's been quite a poor month for us, which is views. Views have been quite low. Not like low really historically, like, you know, it's still like, you know, really, really high versus, you know, what we used to get. We're still in a really good place in terms of view numbers, but like versus, say, September and August, views have been quite low in October. Now, YouTube used to be all about the views. Like, the old kind of truism that you'd hear a lot a few years ago was that subscription count is basically a vanity number. Your number of subscribers doesn't matter, because there's plenty of huge YouTubers out there that actually don't get many views at all, because sure, they've got, like, you know, multiple million subscribers, but plenty of those subscribers were acquired, like, you know, 5, 6, 7 years ago, and as a result, they're not really active anymore. The accounts might still be active, and they haven't been purged or deleted by YouTube, but really the actual number of views they get is very low, all things considered, just because they've been, say, really inconsistent with their uploads, or they've done something else, and diddly-diddly-dee. So, you know, we're probably in a healthy situation. Like, for the number of subscribers we've got, we get really, really healthy view counts, which is nice. And that used to be the big thing on YouTube, because you were always chasing views, because views literally translated into ads, and ads translated into revenue, which was why it was the important thing traditionally. That's kind of changed, because, YouTube's kind of done this really thing. I've kind of spoken briefly about this on Twitter in the past. It's a really interesting thing, which is the way YouTube's gone in the past few months. YouTube have kind of made themselves increasingly redundant for YouTubers, which is such an odd position for them to have left themselves in. You see, what I mean is, if, say, 100% of a YouTuber's revenue came from YouTube ads, then the YouTuber's overwhelming incentive would be to work on getting more subs, and then directly from that, I suppose indirectly really, indirectly from that, more views. Because you'd want as many views as possible, because the views is where your income came from. But the moment you completely separate the idea of your income from the number of views you're making, the two stop having any relationship to each other, it kind of doesn't matter that views are down like 15-20% from August. August has happened to be a really damn good month for us, by the way. Like, August, I think, like, pretty much for the first time ever, we broke like 5 million views in a month, which is really, really high. Whereas in like September and October, we're still north of 4 million views, but it's still a fair bit less. I think it's like 15% down on August. So August happened to be a really, really damn good month for us. But that doesn't really translate into anything concrete, whatsoever in terms of, like, we're not being punished for our views being lower because our income's been hit. Because, well, one, obviously, Many a True Nerd, probably you've guessed because you're listening to this, Many a True Nerd is now, like, very significantly to the majority degree fan-funded. So, we've got Patreon, and now we do the regular live streams, and we've got the super chats coming in as well. So all of a sudden, views are completely irrelevant to that. I mean, views still are useful, because if something gets very, very few views, then I know the majority of people aren't watching it and aren't enjoying it. So therefore, like, a series that's like that, I'll potentially, like, look at curtailing, because I want to do something that appeals to the largest number of people possible. But when we've got Patreon and when we've got Super Chat, and then also we've got, in plenty of countries around the world, you've got YouTube Red. And YouTube Red is, actually, it's kind of weird. Like, I hear from so many big YouTubers, oh, YouTube Red's worth, like, nothing. But I think it's because most YouTubers I have, like, any form of personal relationship with are British, and most British YouTubers have a primarily British audience. We don't. We have a primarily North American audience. Like, the number of US and Canadian people together is multiple times bigger than our UK audience. So I think it's just that for people who have UK audiences, I think YouTube Red still doesn't exist in the UK. I think it's still just in North America and a few other countries dotted around the world. So for us, YouTube Red, which again, well, technically YouTube Red does have a connection between views and YouTube Red revenue, because YouTube Red revenue basically says, okay, take people who are part of YouTube Red, take their subscription revenue, and then divide it amongst the people that they watch based on watch time. So if people are watched for longer, they get a larger share. So a smaller number of views but with a higher watch time matters more for them. But because I have no way of knowing who is or isn't a Red revenue kind of person, and, like, there's no reason to believe people who are part of YouTube Red are more or less likely to like a particular series, again, it doesn't really matter, like, in terms of the view count. So once you factor all those things together, ad revenue is actually a really quite small proportion of what Many a True Nerd earns. And then of course the flipping advertiser friendly demonetized videos thing comes into effect. So all of a sudden views completely decouple from earnings, because a video that gets loads of views, well, if it just happened to get demonetized because it was deemed ad unfriendly the moment it went out, well, by the time you get, monetization restored on that video, 80% of views that video will ever have already occurred, so you're basically not going to make any money on that whatsoever, and screw it, you've no idea why that might or might not be. So basically YouTube has completely decoupled views and subs and any form of the traditional metrics we used to look at and consider important from earnings, which is kind of liberating in some ways. It's nice because it means I don't need to worry about views anymore. There's no reason for a YouTuber to really be chasing views whatsoever. Now we can basically focus on servicing, like, small communities and making, and I don't even I shouldn't really call Many a True Nerd small, where I've always kind of said that Many a True Nerd in its current form is kind of like what I think of as, like, the secondary or mid-tier of YouTubers. Like, I think there's, like, an upper tier, which I call, like, the million plus channels in terms of, like, million subscribers plus. I think that's where, like, the upper tier, the top tier, the guys who, if they wanted to, like, sell out and do the brand deals, could make ludicrous money doing that. The people who are invited to major events and are quoted on the BBC. Though we have been quoted on the BBC before. We were quoted when the Fine Brothers thing was going on. By sheer coincidence, a BBC journalist saw me tweeting about it and got in contact, so I am quoted in a BBC article about the Fine Brothers business, which is kind of cool. But anyway, those are, like, the top tier guys, and then I think, like, maybe 100,000 up to 1 million is, like, the secondary tier guys, I suppose, and maybe that's a bit harsh, because, like, people who've got 90,000 subscribers and very active base, it feels harsh to call them small YouTubers, so maybe I should lower that threshold a little bit. But, like, in that sort of area, I consider, like, the mid-tier YouTubers. And the old wisdom was the mid-tier YouTubers basically should just kind of keep pushing and pushing and pushing to try and get to be high-up YouTubers. But in all fairness, like, Many a True Nerd's really comfortable. We're really comfortable where we are right now with the Patreon and the weekly, just once weekly live streams and the super chat and the ad revenue being still there, albeit now in a very, very minor key, and the red revenue. Like, you put it all together and we're comfortable, we're fine. Like, I don't feel the need to be constantly chasing and kind of pushing forwards, which, as I say, is is a strangely liberating sensation, actually, because it means, like, yeah, rather than just kind of constantly pushing for growth and thinking, okay, I've got to figure out what the next big thing's going to be. Like, you know, even though I don't want to do this series next, this big series, I've got to do this next, because this is the series that might go big. This is the series that might rank on this search term, so I've got to do that, because that will get the subs in. I've got to get the subs, and I've got to get the views, because otherwise Tabby's not going to be able to eat, and then we're not going to be able to eat, and then we're going to have to eat Tabby, and that will all be really, really sad. So we don't have to worry about that anyway. We've never actually worried about that particularly. We've never actually considered eating Tabby. Honestly, she's quite small. So, you know, it's a bit of a kind of a waste of time, because it would take a lot of time and effort to catch her, and then the butchering and cooking will probably be very traumatic, and then once all that's done, we'd probably only get, like, one meal out of her. And even then, it wouldn't be enough on her own. We'd, like, have to put her with, like, some pasta, maybe some rice, and some sauce. So, you know, like, she'd only be, like, a third of a couple of meals, and then some leftovers. So it kind of feels like that would be pointless, so we probably shouldn't do that. So that's kind of the weird state YouTube's in right now, that, yeah, we've kind of been accidentally liberated from actually chasing views, which I kind of was originally really worried about, but kind of having, you know, sat down and thought about it a bit over the last month, actually it's kind of good, because it means I can basically just say, okay, cool, I'm just going to do what I like, and it's going to be stuff I know the existing community likes, and we're just going to do fun stuff. We're just going to do fun stuff that's cool, and we don't have to be too stressed out about it. And also, things have stopped exploding, so, again, better and flipping better. Oh, speaking of Tabby, by the way, we missed Tabby photos last month, so I did promise Tabby videos. So, Claire, roll the Tabby video. That was a video of Tabby. I didn't record that, Claire recorded that, so I don't know what it's going to be of, but I'm going to guess it's probably Tabby being mostly asleep and just turning to look at the camera, because for the most part she does just sleep and look at things that are vaguely near her. She is something of a lazy cat. Anyway, let's move on to the questions. John, did you ever consider going further with your education as a classicist, like becoming an educator? Well, those kind of feel like two separate questions, so I'll kind of treat them separately. Did I ever consider going further with my education? No. I knew a lot of people when I was at university who, like, even while they were doing their undergraduate degrees, like, their big thing was, oh, and, you know, I'm planning to do this, and then I'm going to go and do my postgraduate doing that, and then I want to do a PhD doing the other. And I was never interested in that. I always basically wanted to, like, go to a good university, get a good undergraduate degree, and then, like, take that and do something with it. Like, try and, like, you know, play around in the world of work for a bit and figure out what I could do and what I was good at and stuff. So I never really had any interest in going any further. And to this day, I don't really have any interest in going back as a mature student at any point and, like, doing anything like that. That just doesn't really appeal. I don't really see that. Well, it's harsh to see, and, like, it's wrong, and it sounds weird to me to say I don't really see the point, because obviously I see the advantage of learning for its own benefit and self-improvement and exercising the mind, and education is a basic, fundamental, personal and social good. All of that I absolutely agree with. For me personally, I don't think it would be the thing I'd like to do. I like learning things as I go, and I like learning things on the job, which is why I've kind of, you know, I did that for 4 years, and then I did various jobs, and I moved around jobs, like, you know, once every few years, just to kind of keep things fresh and keep learning new things. Then I came and did this, and now I'm learning all about all of this stuff as well, which is really cool. So I think if I went back now, it would feel like a backward step for me. I kind of, once I've done something, I tend to kind of move on from it. So I've never really thought about going further like that. But in the specific case of, did I ever consider actually becoming an educator? Yes, actually. Not because I ever particularly wanted to be, but just because once I was done with my education, I wasn't really sure what I was going to do next exactly. Because I graduated round about 2008. So I graduated right basically into the economic crisis. So there were, you know, questions as to what exactly I ought to do and so forth. So one of the things I did consider, like, you know, I took a real scattergun approach to it. Like, after I graduated, I applied to literally anything just to see what I could get. And one of the things I applied to was a private Catholic school down in the southwest of England, which, if you don't know, England is a really kind of rural area. Kind of the areas around Devon and Somerset and Cornwall are, it would be wrong to say backwards. It would be very wrong to say backwards. But they are definitely very rural. They are not big, bustling, metropolitan, advanced heartlands of any description. They're lovely. They're beautiful areas of the country. And it's really lovely they're there. But, they're not exactly the bustling centres of industry. So there was a private Catholic school down in that part of the country that was looking for a classics teacher. And I want to be clear, I had no training whatsoever as a teacher. And I actually applied to that job to teach classics there, and they invited me along, and I went there for 2 flipping days and stayed overnight in a Catholic monastery where if you had a religious crisis, there was a phone number you could ring and a monk would come to you at any time of day or night to help you get over a crisis of faith. That's a real genuine thing. That is not a joke. That was actually a thing. There was a phone and a little number next to it that you could ring if you had any form of religious crisis, and a monk would come to your room, so you could literally order a monk on room service. Genuinely true. And I actually kind of did like little kind of test classes. I actually stood in front of a room of children and taught them little bits of Latin and Greek, and they offered me the job. They genuinely offered me the job, and I very nearly took it, because at that point I've been applying to a few jobs and I hadn't had like a huge amount of success in kind of getting anything else. This was, I think, possibly the first like proper after I graduated job I was offered. So I kind of almost went for it just because it was a job. It was actually a job. And, would have paid me money to do a thing that I thought I could probably pick up as I went along. Bear in mind, they offered me this job when I had no training. And as far as I'm aware, they hadn't done any form of, checks on me personally to, know that I was safe to work with children. I am, obviously. I would have passed anything that they would have actually kind of done. But I kind of feel like they should have done that first. But this entirely unknown, untested person with no form of teacher training, they said, hey, do you want to come and be a teacher? And I very nearly said yes. So there's an alternate universe where I am currently a flipping classics teacher in the rural southwest of England. So that universe is a very, very different place for me. How historically accurate are the retinue and personality traits of the Total War generals? Is there something comparable to a general travelling around with a fetish slave and a wrestler? Maybe not that in particular, and not so much in the Republican era, but certainly during the Imperial Age, the Imperial households and people that were appointed by the Emperor, and in some cases the Emperor himself, certainly had a bit of a reputation for sometimes travelling around with a bit of a retinue that might have been some less conventional individuals. Though bear in mind that lots of kind of the scurrilous gossip we have about Roman emperors was very often written after they were dead by people who had a bit of an axe to grind against them. So we probably can't take it too seriously. Certainly the idea of people in senior kind of political positions kind of actually having a retinue that they liked hanging around with and actually utilised to some degree is certainly true, in the sense of, say, we know about the Liberti, the freedmen of Rome, where people who were slaves to important individuals might be freed after a certain period of service. But they wouldn't actually become full citizens at that point. Their children, once they were freed, could go on to become full Roman citizens. But the Liberti was a bit of a legal grey area. So the person who freed them was still their patronus, literally their patron. So there we are, we're straight back to patron, but albeit in an earlier era. So there was still a relationship. And very often, especially if it was an important high-up political person, the person who was a slave and then freed would just go back to working for the person who freed them. So basically just transitioning from slave to servant. But of course, with benefits they had certain more political and voting rights, and they were actually paid, and if they wanted to stop being a servant they could, because they weren't slaves anymore. So it was kind of interesting, and very often we have a lot of these freedmen through history who would continue, even though they weren't senior senatorial, good, upstanding Romans diddly-diddly-dee. They would still basically be very high up in government just by association with the person that they hung out with. This was always a question Rome never really had an answer to. Like in the early imperial era, there were some laws made so that they could, serve more in the imperial bureaucracy. But then kind of later on in the imperial era, more laws were brought in that said, oh, no, actually, no, we want to limit the amount of power that they can actually wield. So kind of, yes, but maybe it's not quite as simple as a Roman general travelling around with a jester and an exotic slave. Hey John, writes Rowena, can you please sing happy birthday to Chris? We both love your channel and we always watch it together. Yes, absolutely I can. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Chris. Happy birthday to you. There you go. Happy birthday, Chris. How good is your French? Not as good as it should be. I've kind of vaguely at various points thought, hey, I should probably improve my French because, Claire's French and she has French family whose English is not great. But I've kind of not got around to it, so I really should do that at some point. What was your favourite holiday? I very rarely go on holiday. I'm not much of a traveller, to be honest. I don't enjoy the act of travelling. It's been a while. When was the last bloody time I went on holiday? Actually went on holiday. I've done a couple of small little weekends away and stuff around the UK not so long ago. But actually going abroad, it's been a long time. The few times in the past few years I did go abroad, it was always for business. When was the last time I went abroad for pleasure? It could have been a decade ago, or very close to a decade ago at this point, when I went to Seattle to visit an old friend who lives in that area. In terms of my favourite holidays, probably, when I was a teenager, I went on a few school trips to the ancient world, which I suppose kind of were very important for me because they're what kind of reinforced and cemented that I wanted to study classics at university, and I suppose all of that kind of led to all the stuff that came after it, and almost led to the Catholic monastery situation. So, swings and roundabouts. Can you recommend any books or podcasts for someone who wants to learn more about ancient history, i.e. Rome and Greece? If you're just starting off and you want a little taster, I do think that, the Extra History guys, the channel is Extra Credits, the series within it is Extra History, they do some fun little snapshots of little bits of Roman history. It's very simplified down, but it's a good little introduction to various eras, and then if you like the sound of that era, then obviously you can go on to research it in more detail. So I think for kind of, beginners and newcomers, they're a fun, accessible way to kind of just get some of the basics. Would it ever be possible to have an MHN cooking special crossover with the food of Dad Cubes? I've met Steve a couple of times. I actually, I think it was the first time I met him was this year at EGX Resd. I've met most of the Nerd Cube guys more often than that. Watt and Tracy, I've run into at multiple game shows in the past, so I've met those guys quite a few times. I never really considered it, and that's because I don't really consider the cooking specials to be a sort of series for me, so therefore it's not the sort of thing I really see myself ever rolling out and doing more regularly, because I like them being special. I like them being very, very rare. The danger, as far as I'm concerned, in being a YouTuber, is just because something works once, and it's very popular, that doesn't mean you should immediately start doing it regularly. Because if I do something as a one-off that people think is really fun, then you can absolutely be certain that the comments are going to be full of people saying, oh, we need more of this, when's part 2? We've got to have this as a full series. Like when I did the Excel video, just kind of the other week, a lot of people were immediately, oh my goodness, this is so good, this needs to be a series, you need to do this more often, when are you going to do this again? Is this going to be done again for 350? It's no, it's not. Because it works the first time because it's unexpected, and a lot of people go into that, people who go into that who don't know Excel very well go into that what the hell is John doing? This is just a spreadsheet, how can this be entertaining? And, it kind of takes you by surprise, because I tried my best to make it accessible and toss in some humour and make it kind of fun. And I think it works, therefore, because some people who weren't expecting it to be fun found it kind of fun, and some people found it kind of useful and interesting, and people who actually work with Excel liked actually criticising it and finding more efficient ways to do what I'd done. But if I did it, actually on a regular basis, the novelty would wear off so quickly. That's not to say I wouldn't do something like that again, but it can't become a regular thing. And my logic is the same for the cooking. I like keeping it special and doing it as a once a year sort of thing. So I can't imagine it being rolled out, which is kind of, to be honest, like more the barrier to it ever becoming like a crossover event than anything else. But equally, I don't have anything against the idea that maybe the next cooking special, when we do get to that in May of next year, I could look to do something with someone. It's not something I'm thinking about right now, but it might well be something I start having to think about when we actually hit 2018. Hey John, during one of the recordings of the podcast, audio of Claire berating you from that year's cooking video was suddenly put in. Matt proved on Twitter it came from your audio track. You said you deleted the footage years ago. Did you ever find out what happened? Yeah, that was really mysterious. When Claire berating me just appeared as a ghost in the machine. It's just perfect, literally kind of just mysterious audio from the void, and it's Claire yelling at me for being incompetent. It was beautiful. No, I never found out how that happened, because that was indeed audio that had been deleted months before, but then it just showed up unexpectedly. It was very, very odd indeed. Also, the fact that Benor's corpse has never been seen led some speculation that he isn't actually dead. Just between us on Patreon, he's actually 100% dead, right? I can confirm that shouting him off the ledge and not actually going down to witness the body was not done as a sleight of hand so that Benor would still be alive. It was done because I thought it was a really nice, dramatic final shot to end the death of Benor with, kind of just having him disappear into the swirling snowstorm underneath the bridge, and then just the moment's silence, and then walking away. I thought that made a really nice ending. Benor is absolutely 100% dead. I can confirm that, yes. What is my favourite Assassin's Creed game and why? You know, I've got a special fondness for Black Flag. I really enjoyed Black Flag, and it's one of the few I actually played a little bit more of after I'd kind of played a little snippet of each when I was doing Assassin's Creed Week. And I suppose it was colourful, and it was bright, and it felt very different, and it just felt more fun. And that's a really hard thing to quantify, but I kind of felt like it just had a bit of a lighter tone, and it felt more fun and interesting and just charming and fun to play than some of the others, which sometimes felt a little bit po-faced and serious. So it's a hard thing to explain why, but for me, I suppose it was Black Flag. I also enjoyed Syndicate, which also had a bit of a lighter tone, but also Syndicate did the same thing that happens to me with a lot of Ubisoft games recently, which is I have a perfectly nice enough time playing them, but then like after I've played for about 10-20 hours, I lose interest and I don't really want to see the ending. Like, I had a really fun time playing Watch Dogs 2. I really enjoyed Watch Dogs 2, but I totally lost interest in it, and I never really felt any desire to get further in the story. I just had a wonderful time just kind of pottering about and playing with all the mechanics in it, but I just didn't really have much interest in progressing the main story. And I find that's true for a lot of Ubisoft games recently. Like, I personally found Far Cry Primal was a fun game, but after I played it for a few hours, I never thought about it again. And I never had any interest in playing it again. Like, there are exceptions. Like, I did really enjoy Far Cry 4, for example, and I will be playing Far Cry 5. But Assassin's Creed, I'm just not sure it's quite for me. I always have a fun time playing it, but never really have much interest in picking it up again after that point, which is why I just didn't put Assassin's Creed Origin on the channel at all, because I felt like, especially as they have really long intros, they tend to have very long, slow intros, tutorializing things bit by bit. So it takes like multiple parts to get into the game proper. Like, it took me, I think, 2 full parts of Assassin's Creed Syndicate just to actually get into the game bit of the game. Up to that point, it felt like it was pretty much entirely tutorializing, just introducing some characters and movement and controls and whatever. And you know what, I'll give it, the intro to Syndicate was good because it was open and let you experiment and try different play styles and stuff. There was a bit of openness going on there, and they were fun, well put together tutorials, but it just kind of bugs me a little bit that it took so long to get going. Some of them, like, it takes a very long time to actually get to the main bit of the game where you've actually got freedom and it opens up and you can do what you want in that point. So that's why we didn't really get Origins, and I wasn't really planning to put Origins on the channel in future. What's my favourite area of classics? It's literature, and it's always been literature. I've never been so much of a historian. I've always been much more about the literature of the ancient world, specifically ancient Hellas. So Like, my historical knowledge is as good as it needs to be so that I understand the historical context and references in literature, but tends not to be much better than that, especially when it comes to Rome. So it's always been about literature for me. Hellenistic literature was my specialisation. How are you? I'm fine, thank you. Feeling much more relaxed. How's Claire? Probably about the same. How's Tabby? She's sleeping right now. That's kind of how she spends 22 hours a day. Do you enjoy Halloween? Claire enjoys it more. Halloween for me is a bit of a weird holiday. Like, in the UK, Halloween never really used to be a big thing. Or at least it wasn't when I grew up. It was just a thing. Like, but now trick-or-treating is kind of vaguely in some places come over to the UK, which I'm very odd, because it's never really been a UK tradition. Claire really enjoys dressing up, though. Claire really enjoys, like, putting on costumes and costume parties and stuff. So she's very much all in for the Halloween. For me, kind of, like, dressing up and cosplay and whatever has never really been so much my thing. So Halloween's never really been my holiday of choice. Not only just, like, it's not even like a bank holiday. It's not a day off or anything. It's just a normal working day with an evening on the end. It's just the final day of October. So for me, I've never really been like a big Halloween-y sort of fan. Christmas is coming up. How are you going to get into the spirit of Christmas? I'm not. Hate Christmas so much, bar humbug. Actually, I'm pretty bad at most holidays. Christmas, I think last year, where we live, I think we put up the tree, like, on, like, the 24th or something. We kind of put up the tree, like, literally the last minute possible. And then we kind of kept it up, like, way into January, because we just kept forgetting to take it down again. We just kept forgetting to take it down. So, how are we going to get into the spirit of Christmas? Probably by rushing all the Christmas stuff on about December the 24th, if I had to guess. When playing games like Life is Strange, do you make choices based on what you would do or what the character should do? For me, they're kind of the same. Like, I try and make the character do what strikes me as the most logical, sensible thing for the character to do. So, like, I try and make decisions that actually I think are going to come up with what is hopefully the best outcome, thinking rationally. Though I do often kind of deviate from that and roleplay a bit too. Like, you know, in the case of Life is Strange and, say, the romance stuff, I'm just basically going all in for all the romance options, and just 'cause it strikes me as funny. When it comes down to, I can't even remember his bloody name, the incredibly boring, bland guy who Chloe can sort of date if you're not interested in her dating Rachel. To be honest, the plot seems pretty damn obsessed with railroading you into being obsessed with Rachel, so I'm not really sure how you could go out with that guy and have a fling with that guy, even if you wanted to, because the plot seems very much obsessed with Chloe and Rachel, which is understandable, because that leaves Chloe in the situation she's in when you run into her in the original Life is Strange, because, you know, the ending of this game is sort of predestined anyway, so sometimes I roleplay a bit, but I often do, for the most part, try and make the choices rationally and try and come up with the best possible outcomes. What is my favourite wine? Don't drink the stuff, I'm afraid. It always gives me a headache, though I do enjoy a little snifter of dessert wine occasionally, so I do like a small glass of dessert wine more than kind of traditional wines with the meal. When relaxing, what do you do? I read quite a lot at the minute. I recently went through kind of a big burst of rereading loads of Terry Pratchett, and right now I'm rereading, like, loads of books from Jasper Fforde. And I'm doing that because I recently basically finished reading literally everything in the Assassin series of books from Robin Hobb. I think there's about 12 of them or something. Maybe there's slightly more than that because there's a couple of, like, little spin-off ones. Maybe it's more like 14. But I finished reading absolutely all of those, so I was kind of looking for something new to read. So for the moment, I've just been kind of rereading some classics. Recently is what I've been doing. John, for the record, we heartily encourage and support your idea of having Claire's Sim Corner as an ongoing series. Yeah, I have been thinking about that. Like, we'll look at it. Like, we're not sure it's like the thing everybody wants, but I do vaguely like the idea of Claire having a little corner in some capacity, but I'm not sure Claire actually wants to do it, so, you know, that's an important thing in the process as well, so we'll see about that. It's something I've kind of vaguely got in mind. John, answering a question from the last Patroncast where you were wondering why people weren't enjoying Total War Warhammer 2 more, I suspect a big part of it might be the battles are frankly messy and hard to follow. I agree, actually. I agree with what you're saying. I wanted to kind of add more onto it, because recently I was kind of out of curiosity, I was just checking how all the videos look. The thing is, some games are basically kind of, just because of the limitations of YouTube, they're not going to look good. because the thing is, YouTube kind of caps out at a certain level of quality. Like, it doesn't matter what quality of video I upload to YouTube, it will compress it down to a level where it looks like the bitrate at which it was rendered is lower than it actually was. And I think like Warhammer 2 kind of falls into the threshold where there's so much UI on screen and the UI is kind of shrunk down to fit more stuff in that it's actually quite flipping hard to read. And the campaign map is very, very kind of visually busy, and there's a lot of units on screen, and you zoom out quite far because the camera goes out very far these days. I think part of the problem, and why it looks a little bit messy from the YouTube perspective, is literally YouTube, its compression, and the slight loss of quality you get means that some things are actually quite hard to read. I think it's genuinely a little bit hard to read. And when I compare like the version that's running at 1080p on YouTube versus running on the exact same monitor, the original file that I upload, like the original file looks a lot nicer. And I think some of the detail is lost. And I think like, yeah, especially like big RTS-y stuff like Total War sometimes struggles a bit. Like, I don't think it affects Rome or Medieval 2 because that was just an earlier, simpler part of the franchise where there weren't so many different things on screen simultaneously, and things like, you know, they didn't have to squeeze in army abilities and general abilities and also mages and all of their spells and also a ton of other things that have kind of been introduced since. Like, I think both the campaign map, actually, no offense, like especially the campaign map with like, you know, the actual kind of the army and all of the upgrades for the guy and the little kind of icons in the bottom left indicating, hey, these are the unique buffs or debuffs attached to this general at this time, and then the top right, the little icons that represent, hey, these are the faction-wide buffs and debuffs that are currently in play at this time, and then like the food counter and everything else. I agree, the UI's got a bit cluttered. And I think if you could actually see what I'm seeing and you could actually see the video file that I'm uploading exactly in the quality I'm uploading it, I think it will be less of a problem. And I think that's just a bit of a barrier that exists for Total War Warhammer 2 on YouTube, unfortunately. There are potential solutions, by the way, that I'll kind of try and bring in a bit. Like, during battles, I can kind of zoom in a bit closer during the actual fighting, so you can actually kind of see the units taking each other on. Because when you actually zoom in Warhammer 2, it is actually quite cool and impressive how the units do actually kind of skirmish and fight with each other. It's a lot neater and cooler looking now than it was back in the days of Medieval 2 when they sort of introduced that system. So I might try and do that to improve it a little bit. John, have you ever watched Ripper Street? No, literally not one episode, unfortunately. Sorry about that. What's the most embarrassing thing you've ever done? I'm not sure if this counts as embarrassing, but it certainly felt embarrassing to me. I once collapsed in the middle of a major international airport. I can't remember if there was ever a reason for it. I think it was just I'd got up early and I was tired and I'd been in a rush, so I'd had a proper breakfast and I was dehydrated and it was just really hot in the terminal. But like literally I just remember feeling lightheaded in the middle of an airport, WH Smith's, and I just collapsed, and then I came to basically on the ground in a WH Smith's, but basically there was very large crowds floating around, and then I was wheeled out on a big trolley because they wanted to kind of put some fluids into my system, and basically, yeah, being wheeled out on a trolley in the middle of a major international airport is... There's a lot of people looking at you. So I decided I felt very, very self-conscious, so I thought I'd close my eyes. But then everyone just thought I was dead. So that basically just increased the number of people who were looking at me. Because all of a sudden it looks like they're kind of... Because I was looking very, very pale because I'd collapsed. So I was very pale and then I was kind of still... I had my eyes closed. So all of a sudden someone thought I was like, you know, badly injured or dead or in a coma. So all of a sudden more people were... So I caused a bit of fun in a major international airport. A lot of people very interested in the pale, dead-looking person being wheeled out of an international airport. That was good. That was very, very good. What are some of your ideas for the 350,000 subscriber special? I honestly don't know. I didn't have one in mind. Plus, I'm not sure if I'll even do one for 350. I suppose maybe 400 is a bit far away. Maybe I should do it every 50k at this point. Maybe every 50k is about right. I don't really know. We have come up with an interesting idea, which was a Latin lesson, which is actually kind of fun. I actually kind of like that idea. Maybe Greek instead of Latin. I mean, it would take a lot of work because if I wanted to kind of do that visually, yeah, I'd need to kind of have a language guide happening on screen. Maybe Latin would be easier because then we wouldn't have to start with the flipping alphabet. People can at least read the alphabet so they could read the words. That's an interesting idea. It's actually sort of an interesting idea, a Latin lesson, or specifically taking a passage of Latin and like going through how to translate it. I don't know if that would be would that be weird? I don't know if that would be weird. Maybe we'll do that. Have you ever been much into anime? Honestly, not much. Like, when I was a teenager, I watched a tiny bit of Dragon Ball, but I never really got much into it, to be honest. So, for the most part, probably no. When I was a kid, I really enjoyed the Pokemon animated series, which is that anime? I mean, it's kind of drawn in an anime style, but I never really consider it anime. But I suppose technically it is kind of anime. So yes, I suppose that much at least, yes. Kind of funny you mentioned Mulan in the post above. My little girl, who just turned 2 a couple of weeks ago, her favourite movie is Mulan, mostly because she loves the horse. Ooh, if you like kind of sassy horses in Disney films, Hunchback of Notre Dame. Hunchback of Notre Dame, because Achilles is the best horse in all of Disney. I love Phoebus' horse, Achilles. Achilles is the star of that show. Though actually, maybe not, because that's, for a Disney film, that one's pretty dark. It's a great one. It's a classic. I think it's one of the real underrated classics, but it's quite dark. It's quite dark and goes some quite dark places, so might not necessarily be appropriate for a 2-year-old. Actually, probably for a 2-year-old, it'll probably, the darkness will probably just go straight over her head. So yes, maybe actually Hunchback of Notre Dame after all. What are your favourite and least favourite towns in the UK? Favourite, I still have kind of a bit of a long hanging over kind of admiration and love for Oxford, where I went to university, but to be honest, that's probably like tinged by nostalgia. It's probably not that great, but I'm just nostalgia for it. Least favourite is probably Milton Keynes, which is probably very unfair to Milton Keynes. I'm sure there's lovely things about Milton Keynes. It's just every time I've ever passed through it in travel, it's always seemed very grey and kind of vaguely nightmarish and dystopian. It does seem kind of like it's designed to suck all your happiness away. It's like a Dementor in city form. What's the biggest misconception about ancient Rome the general population has nowadays? About the ancient world in general, that these statues are supposed to be white. And to this day, anytime you see anything set in the ancient world, the statues are all kind of pure white. We know because we found, the remnants of, the pigments actually on the surface of the statue. Ancient world statues were painted in ludicrously gaudy colours. Like the most brightest garish colours you could get your hands on. Vibrant pinks and greens and yellows all over the flipping shop. They would have been bright and gaudy, and they would have looked absolutely, utterly tasteless to modern sensibilities. So even though we now know they should be painted, they can never be painted in films because they don't look classy enough to our understanding of how things should look. So that's kind of fun. And could you play more Witcher in November? Not in November, because I do want to do a little Dead Space thing. I want to do a little Dead Space thing in November. I want to kind of squeeze that in November. With Visceral being shut down, it would be nice to do a little kind of Dead Space thing pretty soon. So I think we'll might squeeze a little Dead Space mini-series in. Then I kind of want to squeeze in Stalker, because I did say I was going to do that this year, so I want to kind of squeeze in a little Stalker miniseries. Witcher might kind of, in terms of Witcher 2 miniseries, might kind of fall into beginning of next year. John, if you could selectively erase your memory and experience one game completely fresh, what would you choose? I don't think it will surprise anyone to hear, actually, it would be Fallout New Vegas, because, one of the things that, in some ways I'm kind of sad about is after I kind of came away from doing, the Jay Sawyer mod survival mode series in New Vegas, was I kind of came away from that, and once that was done, I kind of literally looked at that and just thought, I think I've shown off pretty much literally everything in New Vegas at this point. I could not really think of, there's a couple of tiny things that are very hard to do that are just kind of logistical things. Like, if you show up to Nelson, and run into the NCR guy and you're holding a large enough dose of Psycho, he does actually say, hey, if I had this many doses of Psycho, I could get these guys to run down the hill. If you're actually holding enough Psycho, there's a unique dialogue option that appears where you can kind of offer him the Psycho, and he kind of politely turns it down and is slightly confused and suspicious of the fact you're holding so much flipping Psycho on you. There's the odd thing, the odd little kind of fun little Easter egg I haven't really shown off in New Vegas, but overwhelmingly at this point I think I've shown off pretty much all of it, and that's kind of sad. That's sad in a way, because now when we go back into New Vegas in various forms now, we're kind of looking at mods and stuff. So obviously I've got my eye on Fallout New Vegas Dust, and having that be a little series that would probably run for a little while. I think kind of Frost will run for a little bit longer, but not too much longer. I think Dust would be a longer series. At this point, I don't really know what as a big series I'd do next in New Vegas, because in my mind I've still got big question marks over whether I really want to do Fallout New Vegas Kill Everything kind of remastered, because I know I could do a better job than the original, but I also know that it would kind of be, in some ways, some of it would be recycled material and some of it would be stuff you'd seen before. I just don't know whether it's going to do. It kind of feeds into what I was saying earlier, that just because, you know, some people say, oh, you should totally do this, it doesn't always make it a good idea. Like, I feel I'm divided, to be honest. I feel, as a YouTuber, who I hope has a pretty good sense of what I can and can't do well, I think New Vegas Kill Everything Remastered would please quite a lot of people, but would also be kind of disappointing to other people. No matter how much I did with it, I think some people would be a bit disappointed with it, and I don't think it's as good as some people think it could be. I think I could do a pretty good job with it, but I think it would not be amazing. Like, maybe we'll do it at some point. I honestly don't know. I've got an entire, like, journal with pages and pages and pages just filled with little scribbled notes about, hey, in this area, I could do this, and then we could cut to this area, and that would work really well. But some of the joy of the original kind of Kill Everything series was it was just kind of being made up as I went along. Though I agree I could have done a better job with the narrative. It could all have looked nicer. It could all have been done and cut together better. I could have planned it a lot better. There's definitely stuff I could do, but I kind of half think now, have I done everything? So in answer to that question went miles off on a tangent. In answer to your question, yeah, it would be New Vegas. I'd love to be able to experience New Vegas afresh, because I always had a moment of sadness when I was done with Survival Mode, thinking, is this going to be maybe the last time I do a full big run through of New Vegas that's not based on heavy modding? Because at this point, have I shown off as close to everything as I can? Are you aware that Rome 2 Total War has a campaign pack called Wrath of Sparta set at the outset of the Peloponnesian War? I have heard that before. Rome 2 is one of those games I haven't really played as much. And this kind of feeds into, actually, there's another question further down about Total War Attila. Various people talking about what logically would be the next series that I might consider doing once we've kind of... Actually, Medieval 2 is close to being... Well, not close to being wrapped up, but it's not a million miles off being wrapped up, I would say. So kind of once we get into, I think it'll probably be done by the end of this year. Like, I imagine just because we're doing it fairly quickly, Warhammer 2 and Medieval 2 will probably end at probably broadly comparable points, if I had to guess, I would say. And then we'll be looking for something fresh in the Total War front. I'm still really divided on what to do. There. Just because there's so many things I could do. Like, Attila does strike me as interesting. Rome 2 is interesting. I'd love to go and give Empire some love, because I think Empire is underrated. I think Empire is pretty good. Napoleon I'm not really fussed by. I can probably like happily skip Napoleon and not worry about that. Shogun 2 is widely regarded as a classic, but again, it's one I haven't played much of, so I'd need to sit down and play a lot of that myself first, just to get a bit more to grips with it. Attila I do like the sound of, just because it sounds like, and from the limited amount I've played, it looks like a large number of the things that I liked that kind of survived into Warhammer and Warhammer 2 were kind of things that were in Attila as well. But actually, Creative Assembly have just announced they're doing something new with one of their older games without specifying what how old they mean when they say older. So I'd love to think that might be a new expansion for Medieval 2. That'd be beautiful. The one thing I have decided is the next series of Total War will not be Barbarian Invasion. Barbarian Invasion I do want to do, but because we're doing Rome in the live streams right now, I'll give that generation of Total War a bit of a breather after we're done with that. So Barbarian Invasion will happen, and I think that's a really brilliant one, actually. I love that game so much. It's a brilliant DLC. But we will leave it for the time being. We'll do a more modern one. And yeah, I'm still... Empire, Shogun 2, Rome 2, Attila. I don't know. I don't flipping know. We'll see. We'll flipping see. John, would it be possible to get larger mugs? 11 ounces is way too small for a proper tea mug. Actually, I've never really had any problem with the MAT&T mugs, the two mugs that we've actually got going in the merch store right now. Like, we do have them. We have the mugs in those size, and I've always felt they're a perfectly adequate size. I agree, it might be nicer to have like a ridiculous mega mug But I kind of personally didn't think they were too small. I thought they were a perfectly acceptable size. We have many mugs of comparable size in our mug cupboard. 2 Skyrim questions. Canonically speaking, do you think Benor really cheated, or did Jon kill Benor over a misunderstanding? Neither. The way I kind of saw it happening was, I think kind of the character of Jon is slowly just becoming more and more mad and evil, and I think, like, it's kind of Lady Macbeth-ish. I think she just had a bit of a crazy Lady Macbeth moment and came in and jumped to the worst possible assumption and leapt straight to murder. I think maybe afterwards the character of Jon realised it was a misunderstanding but wasn't, willing to confront that. But I'm just kind of playing Jon as slowly going more and more evil and more mad. Which is, I kind of have an idea in mind, a direction for that, which is why I've kind of been doing certain big quests in a certain order. And you'll see where that goes over the coming parts, because I do kind of have a big plot arc. I do have a big plot arc plan, so there's a lot of evil and madness to come yet, by the way. Just it'll go interesting places. Though to answer the second bit of your question, I only really kind of plan out Skyrim at a really, really flipping high level, and I let the narrative flow in organically. Because I think I do my best work when I don't overplan, and I just kind of let stuff happen that I wasn't really expecting. There was no plan at the beginning of this Skyrim run for me to kind of be using the magical schools I'm using right now and really be quite heavy on the old mage and necromancer front, and there was absolutely no plan whatsoever for Benor to be in it. Benor just happened, he inserted himself into the narrative, and I just kind of ran with it. So I don't overplan these things, I do kind of let them happen organically, which is another reason, kind of picking up what I was saying earlier, why I'm not convinced New Vegas Kill Everything Remastered is necessarily going to work, because I now at this point know and have shown off so much of New Vegas, I don't think it can really surprise me anymore. I've got all these notes for stuff I think I could set up that would be quite funny, but I think the best I could set up is not as funny as something that happens organically and I just weave it in, which is how most of Fallout 3 Kill Everything and, say, the current Skyrim series, how they came together and why I think they work really, really nicely. On podcast, this is apparently more for editing Claire than John. Have you ever listened to Sequelizers? They fix terrible sequels to great movies. I've never actually listened to that myself, but Claire, you may well wish to give that a listen. Interesting question I just finished writing a paper on I thought might interest you. Was Brutus right? Oh, bloody hell. This is going to be a difficult one to answer quickly. I assume what you mean by that is, was Brutus right to assassinate Julius Caesar? Basically because Julius Caesar was starting to act a bit like a king, and Rome didn't like the kings. It's a really difficult question, and I'm not going to be able to answer it, to your satisfaction or anyone's satisfaction, or in a way that's going to be appropriate in the kind of the time I'm working in right now. What I will say is there's an element of context that it's important to get your head around, I think is one of the crucial bits, which is if you hear just kind of, from a modern perspective, Julius Caesar basically appointed himself dictator, then that probably sounds bad. That sounds bad to the modern ear, but constantly throughout the Roman Republic, at times of crisis, they'd said, you know what, we're going to suspend the constitution for a bit, and because the country's in a lot of trouble right now, we're going to make that guy over there dictator, and he's going to wield absolute power, effectively as if he were a king, until the crisis is abated, and then afterwards we'll probably restore the republic. And universally, pretty much they all did at that point, but pretty much it was just an open-ended kingship, until such time as the king felt like saying, you know what, job's done, let's go back to the Republic now. Now, Julius Caesar's a bit of a difficult one, because there wasn't a clear, end point to Julius Caesar's dictatorship. But equally, the stuff that he kind of wanted to do, as dictator, probably did need doing. The level of political dysfunction and mob justice and complete political ineffective governance of the empire, or rather the provinces to be precise. Probably the big problem was Rome had expanded too quickly. Rome's territory had expanded hugely, really, really flipping fast. So many territories now technically belonged to Rome, but the Roman political machine hadn't really kept up with it. So the Roman political machine was not good at managing this. So Rome was incompetently and corruptly and violently managing a very, very large empire, and it wasn't doing a very good job. So some of what Caesar wanted to do actually probably was a good idea, and absolutely the mechanisms existed in place for the constitution of the Republic to be completely suspended, for a dictator to come around and deal with a crisis. But sometimes the question gets asked, okay, what counts as a crisis? What happens if the guy who's actually got the army and the money and the charisma and, you know, the actual whatever personal qualities you need, the guy who can get it done, what if that guy comes and says, this is the problem and I'm going to be dictator for a bit till it's sorted out, and the Senate disagrees because the Senate's part of the problem because their incompetence and corruption is the thing that needs sorting. Like, in some ways, like, I think you could reframe Julius Caesar as a revolutionary, if you like, where he's basically rising up against a totally incompetent regime, and then, for the most part, being fairly merciful to it, though admittedly he's only merciful to the people he defeats, because that's good for, you know, it's good PR, and it means a load of people are basically indebted to him, and it also... I can't answer this question. Like many kind of big questions, there's no definitive answer. Brutus was probably right that Caesar crossed the line a little bit, but in the ancient world and in the context of that era, Julius Caesar was probably a lot more justified in what he wanted to do and how he was going about it than it probably looks to a modern observer. Have you considered automated voiceover announcements for Super Chat donations like they have on Twitch to save time? I have, but that struck me as, one, it's a bit impersonal. I think it's nice for there to be an actual kind of, you know, a personal thing where Claire and I acknowledge it. And two, I didn't like the fact it was open to abuse. And three, I didn't like the fact that it can break flow. Like, I very carefully try and pick games and play them in such a way as we can have kind of moments of lots of progress and then quieter moments where Claire can get us caught up on Super Chat. And I think that's starting to work a bit more smoothly. I think with a bit of practice it's working a lot better. So there's multiple reasons I don't really like kind of automated announcements. Obligatory begging for Dragon Age, Witcher, Last of Us, Divinity Original Sin 2. Okay, I think you can have Dragon Age at some point, just as a mini-series. Not soon, not imminently, but I felt so bad about the joke about Dragon Age on the live stream. I think you're going to get it, so that joke's probably just saved you. Best Discworld story arc. Did like, what's the best one? I mean, my favourite books are probably The Witchers, but then I was never desperate, like, you know, arc implies over time and, probably Vimes, because I did like Vimes and the Summoning Dark, how that actually became kind of a part of his character, and after it showed up originally in Thud, then it kind of kept making a bit of an appearance afterwards in Snuff, for example. So I guess that's kind of a bit of a small arc, really, but I did like the way, yeah, Vimes actually felt like he went on a big journey in some ways. And, like, Vimes went on the most interesting journey, and also there's, like, you know, there's bits of his character he picks up as he goes along. Yeah, I'd say Vimes. I always like the Vimes books quite a lot, actually. In fact, in some ways, maybe they've kind of overtaken The Witches in my affection as my kind of favourite little subset of stories in the Discworld. Hi, John. Dan has begun to write a book. Any chance you would do one? If so, what about? I've never been, like... I probably wouldn't write, like, a YouTuber book, where it's kind of, you know, just look like a generic self-help book or something of that description. It's never something that's appealed to me. As many people know, like, you know, I used to write for pleasure, and I do have a couple of, like, you know, manuscripts in various forms of scruffiness. Like, if YouTube ever completely collapsed, I'd probably, as one, like, big final hurrah, I probably would actually just kind of, you know, polish up a second draft of a book I'd already done and, like, self-publish it, or, I don't know, Kickstarter. I don't know what I'd do. I'd do something. I'd publish some form of book. And it would be fictional. Slightly weird, dark, British comedy fiction. Definitely. Now we're into the end of year release season. Any games you're particularly looking forward to? Well, we've already had Total War Warhammer 2, which is one of the big ones I was looking forward to. Actually, weirdly, the two I'm probably most interested in now at this point are both VR games, which is kind of weird. That's the world moving forward very quickly. Because LA Noire VR and Fallout 4 VR, I'm very much looking forward to. So they're probably the two I'm most interested in. I'm not sure they'll necessarily make good like series, and you might just kind of get a few little kind of shorter videos on Fallout 4 VR. It depends how well it works as a spectator thing, because that's the problem with VR. Sometimes it doesn't work desperately well as a spectator thing, but I'm personally looking very much forward to it regardless. What are your thoughts on the new Super Mario Odyssey game? I don't know. We don't own a Switch. We don't own a Switch, so I have literally no idea. But I've heard very, very good things. Were you ever a fan of Mario? I was back in the day. I really like Sunshine. Which is why actually I really enjoyed Hat in Time, which at the time of recording is going out tonight, but for you will have been out for a couple of days. So yeah, I really enjoyed Hat in Time because it really felt very sunshiny. Where is Tabby's favourite place to sleep? Ooh, so many places. She likes sleeping. Actually, recently she started sleeping again on her cushion. Because she came with a cushion. When we got her, there were specific instructions. This was a very particular cushion that came from her old home that she had to be kept with. She could, we could never throw away the cushion. The cushion was important to her. And when we first got her, she loved sleeping on the cushion. Then she stopped sleeping on the cushion entirely. And if she ever kind of slept near to the cushion, she would actually avoid sleeping on it. And then recently, in recent weeks, she's started sleeping on the cushion again. She decided she likes cushion again. So right now, it's on her cushion that she came with. You did a Fallout 4 30 Things I Want to See discussion video back in June 2015. Have you ever done a proper follow-up to that? I didn't. I thought about it. And I don't have it in front of me right now. So I'm not going to go through all 30 points. But I do recall, even though I didn't get everything I was after, because I was literally laying out, my vision of the perfect Fallout game, there was a lot that I kind of said I was interested in that actually worked pretty well, or at least was a step up from some of the older Fallout games. The crafting and the way all that fits together. I liked the new magazine system. I was perfectly happy with the new leveling and perk system. The new character building system where there were less special points, so as a result you had to kind of specialise a bit more carefully. There was a lot I liked. There was generally I think Fallout 4 is one of those unfortunate games that's kind of since become, just because of a couple of maybe not so perfect decisions around the DLC and some other stuff, its involvement with the Creation Club and the fact that multiple DLC packs were just workshop stuff, which most people weren't that desperately interested in, to be honest. Therefore, the full bunch of DLC compared to New Vegas especially, and even compared to Fallout 3, was not particularly inspiring, though it did have Far Harbor, which I think was excellent, and I do hold also that Nuka World is a little bit underrated. I think Nuka World's pretty damn good. So it had two really good bits of DLC, which I suppose arguably is better than Fallout 3, because Fallout 3 only had one really damn good bit of DLC, which was the pit, and the pit was quite small. All things considered, the pit was pretty damn small. So it's an interesting one. It's a really, really interesting one. There's a lot of stuff I like in Fallout 4, and some of the stuff I was asking for did kind of make it in. And I think, I'd like to think, I hope history will be kinder to Fallout 4 than the current kind of internet zeitgeist seems to be. Hi John, what TV shows did you grow up watching, and have you gone back and watched any of your favourites more recently? The big thing that was just coming in when I was a kid was the dawn of Power Rangers. Oh, Power Rangers was amazing. Power Rangers was the best thing. The problem is those early series of Power Rangers were all pretty universally terrible, which is none of the Power Rangers really had personalities in particular, and there were no particularly good plot arcs. For the most part, it was pretty much just Monster of the Week format for series after series after series, which was kind of funny. And I have actually, partly because, as some of you know, I've got various nieces and nephews, and some of my nephews are now getting a bit into Power Rangers, so I've seen some more recent Power Rangers in that regard. And when I was a student, sometimes just in the common room TV would just be turned on to Power Rangers over lunch. There were a few people that liked that when I was at university. Some of the series are so good these days. They've got proper flipping plot arcs now, and the characters have their own arcs, and they've got distinct personalities, and the series has a full arc, and there's a growing, there's an escalation of threat over time, and everything's so much better than the Power Rangers I got when I was growing up. Kids today don't know how bloody lucky they've got it. Are you getting enough exercise? Almost certainly not. Eating your vegetables? Probably not enough. How many health potions would you need to beat Ben in a fist fight? Irrelevant, because he downed me in one punch. John, if you could change one thing about the gaming industry, what would it be? No microtransactions. No microtransactions. And I don't want to kind of ban multiplayer, because that feels like a bit too far. But no multiplayerification of single-player games, okay? There needs to be more good, solid, campaign-based single-player games that have plenty of narrative and are self-contained. But it kind of feels hard to say no multiplayer anymore. But maybe ban microtransactions and, like, provide some form of, like, gaming stimulus package to incentivize more single-player campaigns. What games had the most impact on your own life? Ooh, interesting question. And I'm going to give a really odd answer right now. Diddy Kong Racing. The kind of Rare's kind of vague rip-off of Mario Kart 64, which is probably a really odd one you weren't expecting me to say. The reason I put that one out there is because it was the first game I had on the N64. I got an N64 Christmas of 1997, and the game I got with it was Diddy Kong Racing. Now, up to that point, I'd been a little bit of just like, you know, gaming for me had just been something I did on occasion. I wouldn't really have, you know, and I probably didn't, okay, how to phrase this correctly. Before that point, I just kind of played, like, games on and off. I wouldn't in any way have considered myself a gamer. But with Diddy Kong Racing in the N64, that was probably the first time I started playing a little bit more... Seriously isn't the right term. I'm really struggling to articulate exactly what the change was. But I played more often, and it mattered to me more, and I was more interested in practicing and kind of actually being good at the games, and I was more interested in gaming. Like, before that point, I just kind of picked the odd game off a shelf or whatever, but like, after I got onto the N64, I started reading N64 magazine. And I got a subscription to N64 magazine because I was more interested in the world around gaming and, like, you know, what was coming up and what was going on in the background and what the state of the industry was. So I went from, like, a very casual gamer, I suppose, though that word's become very loaded since, so that's probably not the right term, to, you know, kind of someone who was much more into gaming in a lot of ways. And Diddy Kong Racing is like the game that was literally the transition point there. So I suppose it's quite important in that regard. Are there any aspects of Greek or Roman culture you actually feel are overstated in the mainstream perception of them? Yeah, this one's going to sound really weird. Greek democracy. Like, a lot of people say, oh, Greece, the home of democracy, they invented democracy. No, they invented referendums. They decided everything by referendum, and it was terrible. It didn't work. It led to stupid, contrasting, ever-changing positions. It was wide open to populism and bribery. It was terrible. Greek democracy and how it works and what it did and the results of it is the best possible argument against direct democracy. It makes representative democracy look so much flipping better. Greek direct democracy was a flipping mess. If I moved to Northern Yorkshire, would I be bored out of my mind? I currently live in San Diego. My company has a position out there. It kind of depends where. Like, there's plenty of life in the north of England, but yeah, there's some big cities in that part of the world. Someone actually replied to you already. I agree. Like, if you're talking, like, you know, Leeds is good. Leeds is... I've never lived there myself, but I've known people who have, and, you know, it's a good, big, bustling city with plenty going on in it. So it really kind of depends where. If it's one of the big cities around that area, there are certainly plenty of big, very nice places to live in that part of the world. I've never had sticky toffee pudding in my life, but I've wanted to try it. Is there a recipe you or Claire can recommend? I've never made it myself, I'm afraid, so I doubt I can. And I don't think Claire has either, because Claire doesn't like it. It's kind of more mine thing than Claire's. So, unfortunately, we cannot provide you with a recipe, because we are plebs who simply store by our sticky toffee pudding. Is there any specific reason we didn't get a video on Elix when it was released? I kind of forgot it was coming out, then didn't get review code for it. But since then I have got review code for it, so actually expect to see a video on that in the not too distant future. And the other half of that comment was also like some suggestions around how we should kind of run the super chat pertaining to whether we should start kind of like grouping super chat messages by topic, which one, Claire's already sort of started trying to do, so we've kind of vaguely got that coming in already. And two, if we kind of do that too much, we've noticed that, like, if people have to wait too long for a message to be read out, some of them, like, think we're ignoring them, or they start atting Claire, or they donate again saying, hey, did you miss my first message or something, which we don't want to do. So that's kind of why we can't do that 100% of the time. But Claire, I think, has already started doing a really good job at starting to do that sort of thing, where we sometimes do group it to keep things a bit more efficient. John, you've really got me invested in playing FTL. Ooh, good choice. Any tips for new players? I want easy, I'm not doing particularly well. I blame it on not having a clue what's good or bad in the game. Basically, what I would say is you always want to keep ahead with your shields. If your shields are ahead of what you're taking on, you're doing a good job. So most ships will start off with a single blob of shielding, and at that point it's going to cost you, I think it costs at that point 100 total scrap to get a second blob of shields, because I think it's like... yeah, it would be like 60 or 70 scrap to get 2 blocks of shield up, and then you'll also need the power to actually fund those shields being on. So typically if I was playing seriously, I'd probably rush to shield 2 as quickly as possible. Then it's like 180, I think, for shield 3 in terms of scrap, and then like 260 for shield 4. So I would recommend basically saying, okay, by the end of Sector 2, you're really going to want to have a second blob of shields up. By the end of Sector 4, you're really going to want to have that third blob of shield up. And by the end of Sector 6, you're really going to want to have 4 blobs of shield. Now, if you're playing on a high difficulty, that's going to be hard to do because scrap is so flipping rare. And you might say, okay, I'll accept only having 3 blobs of shield, but I'll also have stealth to offset that or something. But for easy mode, there should be enough scrap floating around that you actually want to do that. And the thing is, if you get your defenses up faster, if you basically prioritize getting your shields up, then you're taking less damage, then you're spending less money on repairs, and then you've got more money to go on to upgrade your shield further down the line, which is why I think one of the best things you can do is pretty much as soon as you can, get a second blob of shields up, because then pretty much like in the early game for the first 2 sectors, loads of things you run into will literally be unable to damage you at all unless they've got like a missile launcher or something like that. So I'd recommend doing that, Emily. Really love the live stream of Life is Strange. Will the last episode be another live stream? I think it might be actually, because it did go pretty well and I think I had a lot of fun doing it and it went down pretty well. So possibly yes. John, do you think the agility skill tree in Fallout 4 is ridiculously overpowered? Yes, but that's mostly because of Ninja, which is just basically pretty much essential for just about anyone. Doesn't matter what weapon you're using, whether it's melee, in fact, especially if it's melee, or if you're using a gun, Ninja's just too essential. I'd maybe I think it could be fixed slightly by just moving Ninja a bit further down. If you just move Ninja to like agility 5 or 6, you'd take away a lot of the incentive for it. Although arguably maybe you should just focus on powering up some other stuff. I mean, there's a lot of powerful stuff in Fallout 4. Like, I think like the optimal playthrough is probably high agility, high luck. Because, like, having loads of criticals maxed out to as powerful as they can be, and also having loads of action points, and using also luck to obviously gain those criticals really fast, and just basically constantly having criticals in the bag, I feel like that's probably the optimal character, high agility, high luck character. But that's fine. There's always been, like, some perks that are better than others. Like, you know, when you're playing Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas, like, I never don't have Intelligence 9 or 10. And, like, it's become pretty clear from when I played Fallout 1 that pretty much you want to have Agility 10 in that game. Just get up to Agility 10 at the earliest possible opportunity, because it's so damn useful to be able to do, say, like a double VAT shot with a gun inside a single round. So there's always been, like, you know, in Fallout, one stat that's a little bit better than the others. Actually, in some ways, I think it's not as bad in Fallout 4 as it is in some other games. Because there's no stat in Fallout 4, I would say, this stat always goes to 9 or 10. There is no such stat. That's possibly because they gave you less special points, so maybe that's a false comparison. John, are you thinking of stopping at all? Stopping YouTube? Nope, loving it. We're definitely staying aboard this crazy train for a bit. John, what's the most thrill-seeking thing you've done? Skydiving? Never done that. Scuba diving? Never done that. Never done any form of jumping out of a plane, fortunately. I consider that a good thing. When I was a teenager, I really liked theme parks, by the way. So I'd always go to like the biggest theme parks going and ride the biggest roller coaster. That was really cool. Now that seems kind of scary and terrifying and pointless to me, so I've clearly got old. When I was a teenager, I was really into roller coasters. Which places have I been on holiday, aside from what I was mentioning earlier with the various kind of classical trips? Not so many places. Like, when I was a kid, like, I went on with my parents to various kind of very kind of touristy, just resorty places. Like, we went to the Canary Islands a few times, and, you know, so I've been to, like, Lanzarote and Tenerife and Fuerteventura. Actually, maybe I haven't been to Fuerteventura. Maybe that's one of the ones I haven't been to. I can't recall. And, you know, we went to France and Portugal and a few other places. And at one point, we went to Disneyland. We went to Disneyland when I was a kid, which was very, very cool indeed. But other than that, I haven't been a huge number of places. I'm not well-travelled, to be honest. I'm just not very well-travelled. What's your opinion on Taskmaster on Dave? Actually, I've never watched it. I know Dan's a huge fan. I've never actually watched it. And connected to it, why is the channel Dave called Dave? You know, I don't actually know. I kind of assume it was a joke. We all know your position on Excel and spreadsheets in general. What's your opinion on relational databases? Oh, I don't really have one. I just really like Excel. I'm sorry, I'm not an expert at the various different forms of data storage. When are we going to get John Does the Classics, a variety show equal parts Greek playwrights and karaoke 90s punk rock? Ooh, that does sound good, doesn't it? But unfortunately, maybe never. John, what's your opinion on this spreadsheet? Someone has sent me a spreadsheet. Honestly, it's a little bit on the badly laid out side. Like, it feels like the first 4 tabs really should have been merged in some capacity, and the final tab, which I suppose is like the summary tab, it's not very readable. My problem is readability. Like, as I was kind of saying in my special, like, the thing about Excel to me is if Excel's been done well, then someone who isn't familiar with the data should be able to come in, look at your summary sheet, and understand what the data shows and what that means at a glance. And that kind of, it's just too much data laid out over too wide an area. It needs a summary sheet and it needs some form of data visualization. John, who's your favourite British comedian? Quite possibly Armando Iannucci. I do like Armando Iannucci. He's just had a new film out, The Death of Stalin, which Claire and I are going to go and see later this month. So, yeah, that's he's very, very cool indeed. He's the guy who did The Thick of It, by the way. So, oh, he's great. I love Armando Iannucci. John, you seem to be enjoying Warhammer 2 a lot. Are you considering doing a Mortal Empires campaign on the channel? No, I think that's something I'll do in my own time, because Warhammer 2 just hasn't done really well in terms of the view count, and I think, like, you know, we briefly discussed that previously earlier in this this very Patroncast, where I think there's partly an issue where, like, just because the UI is quite complex and messy and small, it doesn't come across particularly well on YouTube. So I think that's something I'll do on my own time. I personally think Mortal Empires is really kind of cool and exciting that it's such a massive campaign where so many different interesting things can happen. And I like the Chaos Invasions, though admittedly, yeah, they do need a bit of tweaking. I'm probably going to hold off doing a big Mortal Empires campaign until they kind of release the patch they've said they're working on that kind of basically makes Chaos act a little bit more reasonably. Because right now the Chaos system is just a little bit frustrating. So I'm going to wait a little while, but I'll probably play it just for myself, to be honest. Hey John, do you have a particular IP you'd like Obsidian to have another crack at? Oh, you know the answer to that. You know I want them to make New Vegas 2, damn it. John, any word on Mass Effect Andromeda? Oh yes, I probably should finish that. Yeah, I'll finish that at some point. I really will, I promise. This year, I'll finish Mass Effect Andromeda. And how do I feel about the fact it's not getting any DLC? I understand why. It's so unfortunate, really, because if it just had I feel like Andromeda is a good game that's just had a bit of a bad time with gamers and with the press and with its reputation and with its social media and everything. I feel like Andromeda does not deserve the hate it got at all. John, what's your favourite and least favourite forms of transportation? Favourite is walking. I'm very keen on just walking. And least favourite is planes. I hate planes. I don't like being sealed in a pressurised tube that's flying really fast and really high. That unnerves me quite a flipping lot. Basically, I hate getting places fast and love getting places slowly. At what point in classical history do you lose interest? You mentioned on Discord the Goths being way outside of your comfort zone and losing a bit of interest after Vespasian. Why stop about 3/5 of the way through antiquity? Well, the thing is, during my degree, we were really encouraged to specialise. So instead of kind of getting a broad overview of like all Roman history, we really dug down and just kind of tried to get a really deep, detailed understanding of small eras of history. So, like, you know, the very early Imperial era, I know very, very well indeed. The mid-Imperial era, I'm much more fluffy about, to be honest. But as I was saying before, I'm more about Hellenistic literature. Like, all of the Greek plays, for example, I'm damn good at analysing and understanding and cross-referencing and coming up with a historical context and diddly-diddly-dee for pretty much the entire corpus of Greek tragedy. But, you know, some bits of late Athenian history, probably not so hot at. John, have you seen the early access progression-based dinosaur survival game called The Isle? Not that I'm familiar with, but that sounds really cool. Claire, add it to the long list. Can you show a picture of the coasters that didn't quite make the grade? Yes, we can. Claire, could you just quickly take a snapshot of one of the coasters that we actually received as a sample? Bear in mind, of course, this was a sample that hadn't yet been printed. This is, I'm not sure what the brand on it even is, but basically this was an example of what it was going to be, but with our design on it. But if we just kind of also, Claire, if we could just have a photo of that next to the sort of coaster that we did want, like, say, one of the owl ones, I think you'll be able to see on screen right now the comparison between the two. We basically wanted them to be nice and sturdy, like, you know, the sort of thing where if you tap it against a table, you get a nice solid knock, rather than a slightly kind of sad plastic flopping noise. Have you realised yet that Puster became a traitor because he was much more powerful than Lord Skrog? Yes, and I think I've acknowledged that in the series by now. Or rather, I've acknowledged that it kind of came up in the comments a little bit. I thought that was a mechanic just for the Dark Elves. I didn't think it affected the Skaven, but given how in, like, parts that you've seen since, and a couple are coming up, parts too, yeah, the kind of the new generals that have come in since have got very, very high loyalty. Keeping their loyalty under control has been no problem whatsoever. Yeah, it does feel like that's a system. But I kind of feel like the game could have done a better job flagging it to me. Have you ever been shouted at by a group of people because you didn't give a glowing review of a game in a video? Ooh, let's not talk about Journey. I didn't enjoy Journey at all, but I probably approached it with the wrong mindset as well. That's probably one of the most controversial videos I did. Just don't go and watch it. It's not worth it. I think it's not a great video. I tried to salvage it as well as I could by completely redoing the audio for the second part to try and explain my position a bit better, but that's probably the most yelling that's ever occurred. How realistically are Romans and other classical civilizations portrayed in video games, in your opinion? Well, that's a difficult question, because technically the answer is appallingly badly, because they're basically just, you know, skyboxes against which cool stuff is done. But then you shouldn't really expect anything else, because video games never pretended or claimed to be matters of historical record. That's not a thing. So it's a difficult one, because technically they probably do a very bad job, and they include very superficial misunderstandings and very simplified versions of things. But then I don't think we should expect anything else. Or rather, we shouldn't expect or anticipate that video games will be a perfect historical record, because very few things are perfect historical records. There are ancient textbooks written as history that are not great historical records. I'm looking at you, Plutarch. How do you think Cleopatra has been treated by her portrayal in modern media? Oh, I feel sorry for Cleopatra. We have a very poor understanding of what the historical Cleopatra was really like, because everything that's really been written about her in large parts of antiquity was written by someone who had a really big axe to grind, or was telling a story with a very clear kind of hero and villain mythos, because there'd been civil wars after that point, and diddly-diddly-dee. I find it very odd. I personally don't have in my mind any, idea or understanding of what I think Cleopatra was really like. I think that's one of those things that's sadly just lost to history. I suspect her personality is just lost to the mists of time a little bit. Do you have a favourite fictional world? Oh yeah, Jasper Ford's book world in the Thursday Next novels is spectacular. And would you and Claire consider doing a joint stream with Dan and Rebecca? If they asked us, we'd be along like a shot. I'd love to do that. I simply await it happening. Though actually, I was chatting with Dan recently. The vague possibility of us doing something else together is floating around. We shall see. I'm going to be spending a semester abroad in Britain from the US. What are some of the cultural differences I should be aware of? British understatement. Be aware that no one in Britain really says what they're actually thinking, because we politely understate everything. So, if you say, should I do something, and someone replies, I'm not 100% sure about that, they don't mean I'm actually not 100% sure, but I don't really know, so it's probably okay. What they actually mean is, you should absolutely, definitely not do that, and I have a very strong opinion on that basis. Okay? That's what they actually mean by that. If someone tells you they're slightly concerned, it means they're very concerned. And if someone tells you they're very concerned, it means they are so furiously angry right now, they're just basically gritting their teeth to avoid punching you in the face. Basically, no matter what anyone tells you, what they actually mean is probably that, but add another 2 levels of extremity onto it. What was your best and worst experience with a lecturer or other staff while at university? I don't remember any particular one thing standing out as being the best. I kind of had a very good selection of teachers while at university. Probably the worst one was, at one point we were given a very niche, specific, oddly specific, in fact, question about the Iliad. I can't remember what it was now. I can't remember what it was. I just remember how ridiculous it was. It was a very niche question that felt kind of so minor. It was odd that we were set it as a weekly essay. It required a lot of reading, put together a really long essay about it. And as it turned out, the reason we were set it was because the head tutor at the college who'd set us it, basically he'd just written a pamphlet. He'd just written this short pamphlet about this very, very niche topic. So he basically wanted us to write on the same topic. And he hadn't actually released this pamphlet or told us about it. He just, after we kind of all turned in our essays and one of us read it out and then we discussed it, he then just basically handed out the pamphlets and was like, oh, by the way, this is the answer. So basically he'd just come up with this vanity project he was personally interested in. And then basically made all his students write on it too, which was certainly a little bit on the surreal side. John, can you tell us more about your career before YouTube? Currently studying year 3 of 4 for my degree. Very interested in startup culture. Startups are a difficult place to start. I wouldn't recommend having your first job in a startup because they're not really representative of the vast majority of business or corporate or anything culture. They're very, very fast paced. It's a good idea to go in with some good level of business experience before you do that. Like, my entire career can basically be tracked pre-YouTube working for smaller and smaller, I suppose into YouTube as well, working for smaller and smaller and smaller entities. Like, my first job was working at just like a fairly bog standard office. There was maybe like 80 to 100 people working in that office in the company. And that was when I was working in kind of product and logistics and very much offline. So to this day, I know roughly how long it takes to ship a boat from various Chinese ports to Britain, depending on weather and season. So there you flip and go. There's some useless knowledge I just kind of have in the back of my brain that I'll never be able to forget. Then I went into specifically online. And then I started working for the small UK satellite office for a bigger US business. So the US business was hundreds of people, but the UK office, which was pretty much entirely autonomous, was only like 10 people at tops. At various points, it was down to like 5 or 6 when there was a bit of like staff turnover. And that's when I started working in online stuff. Then I went to a slightly larger office, but then the business, that was the entire business because the home office was actually in the UK. So the entire business was smaller and the marketing team I was part of was probably a comparable size, but the actual size of the business was smaller as well. I was still online at that point. Then after that, I went into startups and I got into a startup very, very early on. And startups are fascinating. They're fascinating. And having actually done YouTube now, I think now if YouTube collapsed and I went back into the world of marketing, I think I could do a really good job working for a startup now. Because having run many a true nerd myself and having to have done all the things that you're legally required to do, because this has to be a business, because you have to pay tax on everything and diddly-diddly-dee. Having done all that now, I think I understand a lot better about how businesses and taxes and everything and compliance and all of it fits together. So I think I could do a much better job working for someone else who is running their own small business at this point. So it's fast-paced, and it's really interesting, and it's really independent, and they're really fascinating, and you can do really great things really quickly by improvising it all together. But it's the sort of place, I think, like, to be able to hold your own, you really need to come in with a lot of decent experience already. Now, if you can get in at the really low level and kind of be a bit of a generalist who's just kind of enthusiastic and is willing to kind of turn their hand to a bit of everything, and you can learn really fast, then getting into a startup, if you've got, like, the aptitude for it, like, as one of your, like, early things, could be a really fantastic thing for your career, because you get to have experience doing more advanced stuff earlier on than you would do anywhere else. So it's definitely a good like jumping off point for variety of careers. Actually, it could kind of get you experience in multiple areas that could actually kind of lead you into multiple different directions. So if you are confident you've got the aptitude, maybe do a placement first, because it's definitely not for everybody. Hi John, what's your favourite little known historical fact? I really struggle with this one when I was thinking about it, by the way, because I don't really know what you consider like, little known or not. Like, I have a bit of an interest in like some of like the darker stuff that we just kind of airbrush out of history. I like it when stories get airbrushed out of history. Rather, I don't like that. It's very sinister. But I like kind of those stories that generally like, you don't teach in schools. Like if you're telling a particular story, there's various bits of it you just kind of quietly leave out of the school curriculum when you're teaching it to children. Like, like when I was in school, we were taught all about the Battle of Britain and all about air raids and all about the technology and the history and the strategy and the timings of that. But no one ever mentioned Dresden. No one, of course, even the briefest moment considered mention the firebombing of Dresden. And the other kind of war crimes of that nature that were committed by that side in the war. That's just one thing that they just kind of politely glossed over. And when people talk about the history of Winston Churchill, no one really wants to talk about Gallipoli. And I find that quite interesting as well. But I don't know whether they really count as little known historical facts, but I guess those things, when there's a dominant narrative about a historical event, I like those kind of little stories that kind of get airbrushed out of it. I always like knowing those. Would you consider playing Space Engineers on the channel? Yes, actually, I've been planning to for a while, so expect that in the not too distant future. John, what's your favourite social media thing? Blimey. We're pushing the bounds of what is a broad question here. What's my favourite social media thing? I quite like Twitter. I like the We Rate Dogs Twitter. That's quite charming. Questions around Mass Effect. What would you do to fix the ending to Mass Effect 3? I think that's actually quite simple. Just bring it back to how it was originally going to be, where there was clearly supposed to be some form of ultimate dilemma that Shepard had to pick related to the dark matter and the shrinking, rapidly aging suns that got kind of brought up when you were doing Tali's loyalty mission. There's various hints of it in Mass Effect 2 floating around, so basically just go back to that, where clearly there's some sort of ultimate choice that Shepard would have had to make to the effect of either you destroy the Reapers, but the Reapers were only doing something that would allow for the dark matter to not blow up the universe or something, or presumably make some form of compromise where the Reapers are still allowed to kill a very large number of people. I don't really know what the option would have been there. It could have gone some interesting places. I like the fact that rather than it just being a choice of, hey, how do you destroy the Reapers with this magic button, it would have been more about Shepard actually making a choice and figuring out what the consequences of that are and what's right and wrong, and how far are you able to compromise your own morals because it'll save us? How far do you actually draw that line? Because that would feed also very much into the themes of Mass Effect 1 and 2, basically saying, okay, so sometimes you need to bend the rules to get results, but is that actually right or not? Is it worth sacrificing yourself and your morality, and does that just lead to more problems down the line? I feel like if you could have just somehow created some form of Reaper and Dark Matter conundrum that basically brought that to a head, it would have been thematically a lot more nice. I think it could have worked together. And obviously, you would need to have more actually coming through. The problem with Mass Effect 3 was decisions made in previous games weren't obvious enough. There were some nice moments, in particular pertaining to characters from Mass Effect 2 and them showing up and, what you told them in Mass Effect 2 and whether they were loyal or not, impacting how that went, for example. But I think we could have done a lot more. It would have been lovely to have Mass Effect 3 with more stuff just showing up. Though, to be honest, when I say how do you fix it into Mass Effect 3, it's already been fixed because Citadel exists, and I consider Citadel the canonical ending. Citadel's the canonical ending of Mass Effect 3, and it's perfect. It's literally perfect. What do you think is the true timeline for Mass Effect? I think it's got to be basically all Paragon. Pretty much any game, whenever they say, hey, the actual true canonical run for this, they pretty much always say it's Paragon. It's pretty clear that in Dishonored, they consider that for all the Dishonored games, previously, every single character has always played 100% Paragon and done it in the most goody two-shoes ways possible. And I think the same pretty much is true for Mass Effect as far as I'm concerned. Not least as Paragon Mass Effect is a lot more consistent. Renegade Shepard's all over the flipping place as to what your motivations are and what Renegade actually means. But Paragon Shepard's a very consistent character, which I think makes it a lot more pleasing. John, what's the perfect thing to do on a cold morning? Apply more duvets and get warmer. John, have you ever read much Tacitus? To be honest, no, I haven't read a huge amount of Tacitus. I read samples and snippets of it as they were relevant to areas I was studying, but I've never actually read a huge amount of Tacitus in original or even in translation. Honestly, I find it quite dry. What, in your opinion, is the chance of the Mongols actually attacking any non-rebel settlements before the next podcast? I'd like to think so. There's a multiple stage plan, damn it. We're gonna make it happen. Do you have a favourite of the ancient German tribes of the Roman... Oh, blimey. Sorry, no. I don't have a favourite ancient German tribe. I'm very sorry. How do you feel about American football being played in London? Not my thing, but if you enjoy it or you enjoy watching it, you knock yourselves out. ESPN and other sports news outlets in America say the citizens love it. I've never heard anyone discussing it. I've never seen any chatter about it in real life or on social media, but I'm sure there are people that do. How close are you to the stadium? I don't know what stadium it is. I assume it's happening at... Oh, I believe they play at Wimbledon. Right, that's a very long way away, and something beginning with a T, which I assume is Twickenham. Yeah, those are both down in the southwest, so those are a very long way away from us. You've played both Star Wars and Star Trek games. Admittedly, I've not played many Star Trek games. I've played many more Star Wars games. Which are your favourite? Well, for me, I prefer Star Wars games. I've played a lot more of them, and I think there's a lot of really good Star Wars games. So I'm going to say Star Wars, but it's not really a fair question. I'm giving a bit of a biased answer there. Do you foresee a future where you might stop being a YouTuber and become a streamer instead? No time in the near future. Honestly, I just like the process of putting together videos, and I think videos are a lot more polished and nice looking than streams, so I don't see that happening anytime soon. You talked last month about you and Claire doing The Walking Dead before, where you can see how the two of you react things differently. Any chance of a video like that? The problem with that, I think, would probably still be the case, which is just because I have a lot more practice commentating, I'd probably be very effusive and Claire would be less so. So if you put them like side by side, it will probably seem a bit odd. So I'm not convinced it would necessarily work. I think instead we'd have to, like, you know, play a decision-based game together and discuss it, which is kind of what we're doing with the Life is Strange live stream. So we are kind of doing that right now. Any plans for more Rare Replay? Yes! There's loads of games on Rare Replay we haven't even touched yet. I kind of want to look at cameo elements of Power as well as Blast Corp, so we'll have to kind of have a little look-see at those at some point. Any games you made videos about that you loved while recording but you lost interest in later? Well, I was just discussing previously, that kind of happens with Assassin's Creed and a lot of Yubi games for me. I suppose Realpolitik I kind of came to a bit more of it, well, not a negative view, but not quite such a positive view afterwards, which is I never really kind of felt much, you know, urgent need to play it again. I think it's a pretty damn good game, but I think I might have overstated it a little bit during that video. Last month you mentioned you translated Menander and such yourself. Would you still happen to have those translations? Oh, blimey. Somewhere. The problem is they're all handwritten and my handwriting's appalling, and it will be somewhere in a giant pile of boxes, and I don't know where they are. I'll have a look, see if I can find them, but I don't know. And yeah, they are all handwritten, so I doubt you'll be able to read them anyway, to be honest. Also, Discord link, video description. Shut up, Thomas. It's there sometimes. I just sometimes forget to. Like, it's there about half the time, I think. And finally, could you please record an audiobook version of Terry the Duck, the story you told on Discord? Why, yes. Yes, I can. This is just a story I made up at random on Discord at one point, which we're now going to do a reading of. Terry the Duck, a story by John. Once upon a time, there was a duck. The duck's name was Terry, and all the other ducks said Terry was a bad duck. Because Terry didn't want to say quack quack. Terry wanted to make whatever noise he wanted to that day. But the other ducks were distrustful and traditional. They believed in quack quack, and only quack quack. So Terry went all around the pond and spoke to the other birds. "Hello, Mr. Goose," said Terry. "I do like your honking. Would you like to join me for tea later?" Mr. Goose was delighted. So was Mr. Swan and Mrs. Moorhen. Later that day, Terry waited for all the ducks to be around. Then he called over Mr. Goose, Mr. Swan and Mrs. Moorhen. And Mr. Goose went honk, and Mr. Swan went hiss, and Mrs. Moorhen made that stupid squeaking noise that moorhens make. But they all enjoyed their tea. "See," said Terry, "it doesn't matter what noise you make, we can all share the pond and be friends." But what Terry didn't know was the other ducks had been talking. They already didn't like Terry, but this was too far. Now he was a duck traitor, and he had invited the other birds into duck territory. But Terry didn't know that because he'd been too busy being a pretentious git to bother learning basic facts about pond etiquette. The ducks swam out and surrounded the tea party. It was actually Mr. Swan who struck the first blow, as he hadn't believed in any of Terry's nonsense anyway. He just wanted to steal the duck territory and thought Terry was a useful idiot. But the combined strength of 14 ducks eventually dragged down his neck. He was dead seconds later as soon as they got to his eyes. Mr. Goose fled, but he never fully recovered from the wound to his wing. As a result of that wound, his mate left him that breeding season. He also couldn't migrate with the others. He died alone in the cold that winter. Mrs. Moorhen had died instantly. Moorhens are a bit shit. But as for Terry, the ducks surrounded him last of all. "Quack," they said. "Quack, quack, quack, quack." Terry's bill trembled. quack, he said, a single tear rolling down his face. Damn flipping straight, said Terry's father, before spitting on him. Terry went missing that night. We don't know what happened to him. The end. That was Terry the Duck, a story by many a true nerd. Good afternoon, John. I was wondering if you have any particular conspiracy theories you are adamant are true in some way. Not so many. I mean, I believe technically the position of the US government is there still actually isn't any form of facility that's like generally referred to as Area 51, when clearly there actually literally demonstrably is something out there, isn't there? But it's probably just like an army base or something. But the official position has to be deniability. If I recall correctly, I mean, I may be making that up. I might just be stealing something out of Independence Day there. I seem to recall reading at one point there is blatantly some form of US government facility out there, but there's an excellent chance it probably doesn't contain aliens. Loving Fallout Frost, what other massive game-changing mods do you have lined up? As I mentioned earlier, I think Dust is coming pretty darn soon, probably next. Traditionally, togas worn in ancient Rome were white. However, if you could own a toga, what colour would you make it? Ooh, because like the toga with the senatorial stripe is white with like a stripe of purple, I'd have mine all purple with a stripe of white, because that'd be awesome. What are some of the challenges you face with making a hobby into your full-time job? Separation of work and like home life, because when you work from home, it is kind of difficult to separate the two, and it means you kind of just find yourself like working constantly because you're constantly in your workspace. So that's kind of one of the more interesting challenges, but it's, you know, it's worth it. It's definitely worth it. Would you ever do old games? And I don't mean GameCube era, I mean, NES or Super NES. Maybe some of them. To be honest, probably you're more likely to get N64 era, because if Nintendo do make one of those mini N64s, then absolutely 100% I'm getting one of those. John and Claire, do you watch Stranger Things? No, actually. Neither of us do. We did recently start watching iZombie. We've watched a few episodes of that each. That's kind of fun. So unfortunately we have no opinions on Stranger Things. How did you decide to make MATN the colour purple? I can't remember my exact logic and when. I remember we picked the font pretty much at random for an unrelated thumbnail, then I just liked it, so I kept it, because back then the MATN logo was a completely different font and not the one we have right now. As for why the colour, I can't remember why that particular colour. I remember it amused me to basically have a gaming channel where like the logo was basically like a hot fuchsia. Because it was like, you know, there were a few kind of gaming channels around I remember just seeing at the time that were like, you know, it's like metallic and grey and with explosions and spikes and stuff. And like, you know, it was all very ludicrous, hyper, stupid. So I kind of just like the idea of it just being kind of, you know, just like, you know, big bold letters and like a hot fuchsia. It just struck me as a bit different, so I quite liked that. What's the most teenage thing you've ever done? Oh, I don't bloody know. I was a terrible teenager. I guess at one point I spent ages moping after a particular girl I had a crush on. So that's probably about it. I was not a particularly rebellious punk teenager in any capacity, would you believe? I think you should play the new Fortnite. Not the Battle Royale, but the Tower Defense. Oh, really? Okay, there's a tower defense game. I was about to say, yeah, you know what, I've been thinking about playing Fortnite, but apparently there's two Fortnites and you want the other one. Probably you're going to get the one that you didn't mean then. I kind of wanted to try out the Battle Royale one at some point. I like the visual style of it, it looks cute. Have you ever planned to play more of the old predecessors of games you currently play, like Fallout 2? I was thinking of looking at, well, actually, it's not a predecessor. It's more kind of like a sideways evolution. I was planning to look at Wasteland 2 at some point, which is kind of like, you know, a 3D game, but maybe with a little bit more in common with the older Fallouts, rather than going like full-on action RPG of current modern Fallout. So, yeah, I was kind of going to look at that as kind of like a side study at one point. So I'd expect that at some point in the not too distant future. What, in your opinion, is the best movie associated with video games, not necessarily video games adaptations? Oh, blimey, that's difficult. I mean, I guess The Last Starfighter's kind of associated with, but not directly made out of a video game, so I'll say that, because that one's quite charming. Do you think you'll do a Mass Effect 3 playthrough at some point? Yes, potentially, but if I did, it would be quite pared down. In fact, honestly, I might just skip it. I might just skip large parts of it, and I could just skip straight to Citadel. Citadel's great. I might just do Citadel, because Citadel's better. It's the best bit about Mass Effect 3. How do you make it through the day when life feels like it just wants to destroy you? I drink more tea. I do. I genuinely drink more tea at that point. And I'll very often listen to music. I personally find my mood is very much influenced by music. So if I need to kind of change my mood, I just listen to chirpy music and it cheers me up, which I know is probably like, not a desperately helpful response, but it works for me. Have you ever visited a location after seeing it in a video game, or are there any real life video game locations you would like to visit? If I was ever like in America these days, I might do a little like, New Vegas tour where I just kind of drove between the various real life locations to make a video of it, because that might be fun to do. But to the best of my knowledge, no, I don't believe I've ever actually seen in real life something that's been featured prominently in a video game. Aside from stuff like, I've seen the Statue of Liberty and it's in GTA 4, I guess, and I've been to LA and that's GTA 5, but I guess like nothing where it's like, an absolute direct analogue. You mentioned you hope to have the M80N sweater available in the next batch of merchandise. Well, not quite. I mentioned the next batch of merchandise I think now is probably going to be the coasters and a hoodie. So I was not thinking of a pure purple sweater. I was thinking of a black hoodie, but with some nice little kind of bits of writing on in terms of an M80N on the front and a big many a true nerd on the back, which is the basically what the version I've got does. In various gun-orientated games you've played with the channel, you tend to say some of the lines of, let's see how good the shotgun is, because a good game has a good shotgun. Could you please explain these wise words? Well, it's a bit of a joke. Basically what I mean by that is, it's my test for how satisfying it is to fire a gun. Like, a shooter, it really should feel like when you fire something, a gun should feel powerful, and what it hits should feel like it's actually been hit by a decent level of impact. That is actually important. I think that's a very important part of a shooter, that actually, the guns feel like they've got weight and physics to them, and something that's been hit actually feels like it's been hit by something hard, and actually physics is acting upon that. So what I really mean by that is, does it just feel like there's good, proper, hard-hitting weight and momentum to the guns? John, I just wanted to let you know how much I'm enjoying Fallout 4 Frost. Actually, I've been enjoying... Well, okay. I think it's made a better series than I was expecting. I think enjoying it is the wrong word. Like, I think I've got some real criticisms of Fallout 4 Frost, which is... the person who made it doesn't really seem to understand the difficulty between difficulty and frustration, and has no real desire to make it fun. And very often it's not fun. Very often it is just frustrating and designed in such a way as to be as difficult as possible, regardless as to whether that makes the game more or less actually entertaining. So I think you can kind of tell it's not really been made by a professional team, because that's a pretty big problem, that it just feels like, it's a frustrating thing to play sometimes very frustrating to play. But I do think the end result is actually some really good videos, so I might extend that series a little bit longer than I was planning to originally. John, what is your favourite cut of meat? Oh, blimey, I'm a pleb and I don't really have steaks for the most part, so I'm afraid I literally can't answer your question. Just give me anything, it's fine. If I have a steak, I'll just take a steak. It's alright, I don't even know. What was the first thing you remember wanting to be when you grew up? Architect! I wanted to be an architect, then as it turned out, rather unfortunately, turns out you need to be good at technical drawing to be an architect. I was terrible at technical drawing, so that dream died in an afternoon. Do you use Excel to analyse how M80N's doing, and if so, is the spreadsheet all colourful and full of graphs and pyramids? No, I personally don't. Claire's the one who does that sort of thing. Claire kind of keeps an eye on how things are going in M80N. But yes, there are proper stacked kind of little bar charts on that. It is very pretty indeed. Hi John, is there a game you love that went under everyone else's radar or you feel deserves more love or recognition? A few on the N64 I always kind of look back to like that. Like Hybrid Heaven, which was made by Konami. I think is, quite frankly, a bit of a classic of the N64, but no one ever seems to have played it. Then there was Body Harvest, which just, I literally have spoken to Rockstar about them and said, guys, come on. You must still have the code for Body Harvest sitting around somewhere. Just slightly polished up to HD and re-release it, please. And they were very evasive and wouldn't answer any questions on that topic, which was very, very sad indeed. Hang on, who else do we have around that might do... Oh, Space Station Silicon Valley. That was another classic by Rockstar back when they were DMA Design. So, yeah, unfortunately, we're unlikely to see any of those showing up again, though they should show up because they're all great. How happy did the Excel video make you? Very happy. John, are you actually an Excel wizard? Damn, my secret is revealed. In the Excel video, when the columns were too small to see the data, you dragged the column to the correct size. Surely it would be better just to double click it. Yes, and I think I did that actually earlier in the same video, if I recall correctly. So there's no particular reason why I actually didn't do it later on. It was just kind of, I just kind of did it without thinking, really. John, would you consider streaming or playing again Bounty Train or RimWorld? I think both will show up at some point or other, but I'll just kind of wait until I kind of hear some big stuff about it, like, you know, it gets a big DLC pack or a big release or something. RimWorld, I'll probably wait for its next kind of big release. I think that's still early access, and I think that's still in early access. And Bounty Train, I might well give it a look at again at some point. It does strike me as a good candidate for a live stream. That's certainly true. You just did Excel. Are there any other non-games you'd like to show off? Not in the same way, to be honest. I don't think there's any other bit of software that's a not game that I know as well as Excel. So there's no other kind of, there's no candidate waiting in the wings for me to do a great big PowerPoint video, I'm afraid. The end of the Excel video made me wonder if you're familiar with the work of Edward Tufte, I am not, who literally wrote the book on data visualization. Ooh, okay, fine, I am intrigued. Are you going to make the dataset you used for the Excel video available for the community to use? I'd love to mess around with it and try some data visualization of my own. Oh, go on then, sure, why not? I will try and remember to include a download link to the raw data in the description of the version of this video that's on YouTube. John, what streaming software are you using? OBS. I'm pretty much entirely using OBS. And you ever going to tax the spine of the Sotek Dwarven Cities? Yes, it starts being taxed in a bit I've already recorded. It's coming in pretty soon if I recall correctly. Sorry, I got a bit ahead of myself on Warhammer 2. Yeah, don't worry, it does get taxed very soon indeed. As someone who grew up in the DOS era, I was wondering if there were any old DOS games that you liked and still play. Honestly, none that I can remember. When I was at school, everyone liked QBasic. Everyone having QBasic and having access to the QBasic games was deemed a great thing. There was a little spaceship game, and then there was Dynamite Man, which was a Bomberman ripoff, and was there a big other? No, I think it was mainly just the Spaceship one and Dynamite Man that were the big kind of ones that everyone loved. I suppose if I could find a port to those might be fun, especially Dynamite Man. Yeah, actually, that's a good idea. I might look into that. Good idea. You mentioned on Twitter the original Excel video was going to be over 2 hours long. How different was the original version? Not so different. For the most part, I just took out, like, a bunch of silence and also bits where I tried something, but it didn't work. The version you saw is basically a lot neater. It would have been a lot more confusing in its original version because I tried something and it didn't quite work as I intended, then I had to make changes. So basically it would have been like, okay, so you do this. Wait, hang on, no you don't. Go back to like 2 steps ago and then we'll start again. It works a lot better the way it is, I promise. Have you ever played any Dynasty Warriors games? I think I played one years ago, but I'm afraid I've never really been a fan of the franchise. Were there a lot of people who submitted their Excel survey after the cutoff time? Only a handful. I think there were only like maybe 200 more beyond the cutoff time. I did give people plenty of time to fill it out. Do you have plans to play any of the XCOM games? Yes, but not imminently. I think it would make a really, really good little mini-series, though. Actually, I'll have to think about it. I'm considering it. It's being considered, but I don't know exactly when. But I do agree, I think it might make a really fun little series. Will we get Fallout 2 in the near future? No. There's quite a few things I want to do before Fallout 2. Fallout 2's some way off. What's your favourite type of music or musician? I never know how to answer this, because I like a little bit of everything. Like, I do kind of like vaguely folk rock stuff. And I also just like, I just like really kind of trash pop as well. I really just like kind of trashy pop music. I just like a bit of anything. And I love just listening to video game soundtracks as well, and also classical music. If I ever put the radio on, it'll be to Classic FM. So a little bit of anything, to be honest. Have you ever played any of the Shadowrun games? No, but I think I own a few of them, because at one point they were being given away for free, if I recall correctly. So I'm pretty sure I've got one of them. Possibly the Hong Kong one? I might give it a video at some point, but not imminently. It's not planned anytime soon. Did someone find an easier way to reformulate the data in your Excel video? Yes, actually. I did see a couple of people provided alternative solutions that were quite clever. I mean, I could have come up with something similar, but like at that point, I'd been like, I prepped the morning before the video for like 3 or 4 hours to make sure I was confident everything was going to work out. Then the video itself took like 3+ hours to record. So like by the time we got to that stage, I was like, you know what, I'm just going to manually fudge this, because I don't want it to take more than a full day to record this one video. We'll be seeing in the live streams a return to community chess. I don't think so. I think it was a really fun one-off, but it's one of those things like I was saying above, like, once you do something that works really well once, you don't do it over and over again because you just get diminishing returns. And I think something like that, you'd get really diminishing returns. I think it was fun. It's very fun. And looking forward to new Hitman content. I'm not sure we're going to cover necessarily much more that's attached to the original game at this point, unless in like the new boxed Game of the Year edition, they released a whole bunch of stuff. Honestly, I expect now we'll probably have a bit of a quiet period for Hitman until IO reveal what they're now going to do as an indie studio. What actually is a Claire? Claire is my girlfriend. That was the specific question. Am I married? No, we're not married. Neither of us is really the marrying kind, to be honest. So no, we've just been together for a period of time I can't remember. A while, like 8 years, something. Long enough that I forget how long it is, but a long time. What do you think would be the ideal theme for a simulation game following wine farming, tank dating, ski lift construction, and facilitating wars between giant armies recently? What would be the perfect one? Ooh, that's interesting. I mean, like, I've always liked the idea of, like, you know, being a YouTube simulator, but all of those games are always kind of trash. They're never very good. They're always kind of very casual, and they don't really get to grips with, like, any of the underlying any of it. So I really wish someone could make a good YouTube simulator game, because that would be really, really fascinating. But sadly, all of the ones that exist right now are just kind of terrible. Is there an MATN subscribers spreadsheet? Am I a statistic? No, there is not, because Google doesn't let me pull out of YouTube a list of subscribers where every single individual subscriber is a row of data, and then they can see various things that subscriber has done. YouTube just rolls up the data to periods of time, so I can see what, like, everyone did on a particular day, but I can't follow one person on their journey and see what they've done over time. YouTube's just made the decision that you're not allowed to access that level of data granularity. You're not allowed to look at a single person. I mean, I'd love to be able to. Like, there is nothing I would love more than being able to, like, do a really big bit of analysis on the Many a True Nerd subscriber base and figuring out, okay, when did people come in? And if you came in a particular month, what's your propensity to drop out? What are the things that cause people to drop out? And we could start, you know, troubleshooting and fixing the reasons people unsubscribe, because a lot of people have done over the years. That's just a natural part of YouTube. But I'd love to be able to do that analysis, but sadly, the way YouTube presents the data, it cannot be done. John, have you conceived a plan to get back at Claire's father for scaring you with the knives? I'm thinking next time I go and visit him, I'll just present him with 2 larger knives. That strikes me as just, you know, the nice, simple, easy solution. I'd like to ask for recommendations on what to watch, besides your videos, of course. I tend to get bored easily. Actually, a fun fact, I was thinking of putting together a little video on my own favourite YouTubers, because I am actually a fan of a couple of YouTubers who are actually smaller than Many a True Nerd is, so it kind of feels like it would be nice to give some love to a couple of small channels I think are really, really damn cool. So watch this space. This has kind of inspired me to maybe do that sooner rather than later. John, how does uploading videos to YouTube work for you? Simply, I render them like normally, like, as I was saying, I mean, perfect world, I render them about a week in advance, and then I just upload them at some point, and then I just leave them sitting there unlisted, and then I manually push the button to actually push them live. I don't like scheduling. I prefer to do it manually just so I can keep an eye on the whole process. And did you, Claire and Tabby, dress up for Halloween? Tabby did not, because Tabby would not like being dressed up. I think she would try and scratch anyone who tried to dress her up, in fact. And neither did I, but Claire dressed up as a zombie, and it was really gross, because she like did loads of makeup and stuff, and it was too good, and I didn't like looking at it because it was really gross. Claire, put up a video or link or picture or something of you dressed up as a zombie, because it was super gross, and I did not like it. Would I be able to play Rogue Total War on a fairly basic, non-gaming centric PC? Oh, yeah. Yay. Well, in terms of the technical specs, yes, easily, because I was playing Rome Total War on a crappy little non-gaming laptop like a decade ago. So absolutely any PC that still works in this day and age would be able to play Rome Total War. The problem is sometimes getting it to work on modern operating systems. On that, I'm afraid I can't really offer you much in the way of help. It seems to be a bit hit and miss. Like, for me, Rome Total War runs on Windows 10 like a dream. For a lot of people, it might not do, and I'm afraid I've no idea what the unifying factor is there. It just doesn't seem to be particularly consistent. On the topic of Excel, do you have any experience or suggestions when it comes to array formulas? Array's interesting. It's one of those ones I just never really seem to use. I'm not really sure why. I just don't really use it, which is probably bad on my part, because there's probably processes I've kind of set up in the past where an array would be a faster way to do it, where I've done it over multiple stages instead. So it's just one of those ones I always kind of forget is there and don't use. So, oh dear, sorry, I'm betraying my my Excel plebbiness there. Recommendation for Age of Empires, or rather Age of Empires 2 HDs. Of course, the new Age of Empires has now been pushed back into 2018. Absolutely, I am planning to look at that ahead of the actual kind of new one coming out. And finally, most importantly of all, what kind of food do you think would make the best impromptu weapon? I think a carrot. I think you could really do some damage with a carrot. Like, if someone was kind of coming at you, if you just got like a couple of carrots and you went for the eyes with those carrots, you could do a lot of nasty damage to that person. So I'm going to say carrots, therefore. And on that incredibly important question, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to wrap up the Patroncast for this month. Thank you all so very, very much for your questions. Thank you all so very, very much for listening. And thank you all so very, very much for existing and hanging around, full stop. Because in this weird, liberated world we live in, where views no longer mean anything, yeah, pretty much you guys are the guys that kind of keep me doing what I'm doing, which is very, very fun indeed for me, and hopefully very fun for you as well. So, we'll be back for another Patroncast next month, ladies and gentlemen. Other than that, what have we got coming up over the next few bits and pieces? We've got a few fun stuff. Actually, there's a couple of fun one-offs coming up this next week, and we're actually coming up on the end of... We might even finish up Red Dead Redemption before the next Patroncast, actually. That means I'll need to decide on the new series. Couple of things that got brought up during this actual very Patroncast I am considering as a potential next series. So, yeah, something to keep an eye on. I've got a really cute, as well, kind of for the next week, I've got a really cute little narrative game coming out. Not exactly a classic, but rather the unloved sequel to a classic, and a little indie game that thought it could and sadly couldn't. Some fun stuff coming this next week. Keep an eye out for all of that, and I will see you next month. But in the meantime, I've been John. It's been many a true nerd, and thank you all so very, very much for joining me on the October Patroncast. Thank you very much, and goodbye.